Hey everybody, welcome back to the Live Ultralight Podcast. Today, we've got a pretty cool episode where I won't be narrating or hosting per se. I'm going to be turning the time over to Joe to interview me. So I'll try to take a back seat, not talk much. No, but by way of quick introduction, Joe came on the team a handful of months ago now, almost a half year. And specifically, he was working in video and he had some expertise in podcasts. So he's kind of been the guy behind the curtain with the podcast, and it's fun to bring you on and let you be on stage now, I guess.
We'll see. We'll see if it's fun to bring me on or not.
Do you want to give everyone maybe just a quick background on yourself, and then we'll go from there? So you just want them to know you a little bit. So
Sure, yeah. So I'm the content creator here. It's my job to get these podcasts out to you. It's also my job to get the YouTube videos out to you and occasionally make some ads, whatever Derek, my boss tells me to do, I gotta do. But anyway, we made a video, or you shot a video and I edited a video that came out last week that was titled, what was it? Negative 41, or it was 41 below freezing, winter camping, basically. And it was kind of a bit of a hit for our YouTube channel. And it's cool to see all the comments and everything like that, but people apparently, they want to know more. They want to know more about the trip. A lot of people who are probably new to the YouTube channel, probably like, what stove are you using, all this sort of stuff. Now, we will have a gear list video that will be coming out along with this podcast on the same day, so you guys can check out every single piece of gear. Tayson
meticulously went through it all.
Meticulously goes through every single piece of gear and even put links down for you guys to purchase the gear, or at least to look at on Amazon or on our website at outdoorvitals.com, whatever. Which, by the way, this podcast is powered by Outdoor Vitals. This is the Live Ultralight Podcast. It's all about lightening your gear and building your confidence so that you can start living your life full of outdoor adventures and memories. And of course, Outdoor Vitals, we are a ultralight backpacking gear company. And if you guys are interested in any of the things that we make here, please check the description below. We got a whole list of items that we not only recommend, but we use ourselves when we're out on the trail. So Tayson, I have a list of questions here. Inspired by comments on the YouTube channel.
Which I do we appreciate those comments. We've been reading them, watching them. It's been awesome to see all those comments. And one of those comments actually spurred the thought of we do need to jump on and do a podcast of the behind the scenes stuff. So yeah,
someone specifically asked for this. So whoever, we forgot their name.
We should know his name.
Whoever said you should do a podcast on this, thank you very much. What got you into winter camping in the first place?
That's a really good one, because I definitely didn't grow up doing it or wanting to even do it. But the more I got into regular backpacking, the more I just wanted to spread that out. So one of the reasons was I hate being cooped up all winter long and inside, less sunlight, stuff like that. And so that was a pull. But I also just really love winter and the beauty of it. It's just totally different experience. So you can go to the exact same place you would go in the summer or fall or spring and have a completely different experience with it. The snow, if you're going to a place with snow, it deadens all the sound, so it's just always incredibly quiet. It diversifies the views, so what looks green in this way in the summer is just going to look totally different in the winter. And so that peacefulness and beauty of it also is just really attractive. And then I can't lie, I like the challenge. I like to push the envelope and experience that side as well. So it's kind of been a slower process for me, I guess, but not real slow. I feel like I dove in pretty heavily, but I just continue to enjoy it more and more. I feel like I can probably suffer less and less. So
yeah. Well, what was it like? What was your first winter camping experience? Do you remember? Because before this job, I had only done two. I was in the Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
And there was a scout camp nearby. It was like Maple Dell Scout Camp up near Payson, Utah. Mm-hmm. And twice, I believe, we went up and did what was called a Klondike. And we went up and camped in the snow. And it was freezing cold. I
think those trips do more harm than good for Boy Scouts.
You think so?
I I have a similar experience, like, just of not being ready for that kind of stuff. You don't have the gear for it. You don't have the know-how.
See,
leaders aren't like at least my leader wasn't like meticulously helping kids get ready. It's just like, all right, bring a sleeping bag, and I forgot a pad. I slept on the ground.
Oh, no.
You know what I mean? Like, so sometimes I'm like, I think those trips sometimes do more harm than good for getting people outside.
The most I remember is the frozen boots in the morning. That was probably the worst part of it, was getting out of the sleeping bag. Assuming you got into the sleeping bag dry, then getting out of the sleeping bag and putting on like the crusty, ice covered boots.
Sometimes it's even hard to get your foot in them, you know what I mean? I've had them freeze like almost shut.
And then I don't want to get my hands out to tie the laces, to tighten them up. My dad was in the special forces, so we always had like gear, but it was always heavy. It was always big stuff. So it's interesting coming here and working here, and everybody's like ultralight, all this stuff. Like, it all does the same job,
right? But
this is more premium gear, and it's lighter and more flexible, and all this sort of stuff. And it's very interesting seeing that. My dad's biggest fear was getting wet, like at all.
Yeah.
When here, it seems like getting wet, you can still be okay if you're wet in some of the equipment that we have.
Yeah, I would say though, like getting wet in the winter is maybe a little bit different than you see us react to getting wet in the summer. That's just a really good thing to note about winter camping is it getting wet, you cannot dry your gear out the same. Like, it's just the temperatures. I mean, it's like in the summer you have heat and sunlight, and in the winter you're lucky if you get sunlight, but the heat's never gonna be there, and so it's really hard to dry stuff out. And that's just a really good thing to just always remember when you're winter camping is, if you can, like, spend the time, stop, delayer, relayer to not sweat too much. And anytime you can, avoid getting wet, just do that. Sometimes you get rushed in winter, right? Let's say, and then you kneel in the snow, your pant gets wet, and you think nothing of it, and it can become a problem later for you.
Yeah. So -9 Fahrenheit or 41 below zero, because freezing is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. A lot of confusion in the comments from people probably not in the United States. Very interesting. That's pretty much as cold as it gets around here, right?
Yeah. I mean, that was the biggest reason I did this trip, was just watching the weather and seeing this massive cold front come in. I'm like, oh, this is kind of an opportunity to go test a -15 degree bag that we had under development and kind of getting refreshed, and just looked like a good time to get extreme testing done. So,
so that's what made you decide to take this trip.
That was the biggest one. I think also, like, we've done YouTube for a long time, and I thought it would be fun to try to film something in a little bit different way than I've done, and see how it would work. And so I filmed it that way, and you edit it really well, and people responded. So we'll probably have to do a little bit more of it that way too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of videos I like. Like, I love travel videos a lot, and the more kind of like on the ground and realistic they are, the more I'm like invested in it. So I don't know. I really liked making this video. It was a lot of fun to see you out there kind of suffering in the wind. But then eventually, like, it felt like cozy. I sent the video to a friend. He's like, "Wow, that makes me want to get outdoors again." I was like,
gotta scare him from getting outdoors.
Yeah, the part where you're like, "Oh, I'm losing my mind" or whatever. Yeah. So you saw this big cold front coming in. You were going to leave with someone else in the office, right?
Brigham had talked about going.
Our lead designer.
Our lead designer had talked about going. I don't remember. I think I had kind of been thinking about it in my head, and then he vocalized it, and I was like, oh, let's just go together. And then he had some stuff come up, so he wasn't going to go, and I was like, I'm still going to go. So it wasn't super ideal timing for me, which we'll get into, but made it work. So how much time did you have to prep for it? I think from the time I was like, all right, I'm going to do it, was probably like 1 or 2 days ahead. But yeah, it was pretty rushed. I just didn't it's busy for us this time of year. It's busy for me. So it was pretty much like I do it like I do most trips. I grabbed our checklist, I went in my gear room, and I threw everything in a backpack and came into the office and weighed a few things, grabbed the camera gear, and that was about it, which is why I packed a few extra things, like an extra pair of gloves and So it was a little rushed. Nothing like major, because that's why I love working off a checklist for sure. But had a few extras I accidentally had in the bag, I think, from just being rushed. But it was quick. It was a quick turnaround. Quick
turnaround. And how far? So you went up near Bryan Head, right? Like, tell us about the area.
Yeah. So I ended up going up the canyon straight above us. So kind of across Cedar Breaks, there's a national monument up there. Bryan Head's on one side of it. The peak I was on another. It's called Blowhard Peak, probably named appropriately. And it's over 10,000 feet. And it takes a lot of wind because it's really the highest peak coming off of the Mojave Desert. So Cedar, an hour south of us is the very tip of the Mojave Desert. And then as that air starts to just climb up in elevation, we get a lot of snow here because of that. The clouds will start to dump as they come up and over the mountains, but it also just creates a lot of wind for us. So people farther north from us, typically in Utah or in the center of the state, don't see nearly the winds that we'll often see right here, as we're just getting so much turbulence from the wind or the air coming up in elevation, temperatures changing, and so it was just straight up the canyon, not too far.
Yeah, I've learned a lot about geography since moving down here to Cedar City. We're in the southwest part of the state, pretty close to Zion National Park, about an hour out from there.
I can see Zion from where I was at.
Yeah, we're another hour out from St. George, Utah, which is kind of like the bigger metropolis area in this part of the state. And St. George is known for having no winter.
Yep.
It's just like
45 minutes away, it doesn't snow.
45 minutes away, no snow, nothing. I come down here and I moved down here and I don't know, a month in, get dumped on by snow.
Like and early October, it's just boom.
I'm like, what is happening? Like, is this an unusual winter? And like, no, it's just the elevation.
Just unpredictable. Yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy to me. So it's also crazy to me that like we're here at like 6,000 feet, I think, right?
Yeah, right about.
Yeah. And then it's just like, just go up in the canyon, you're up in the alpine area. You're up at like 11,000 feet, 10,000 feet. Yeah, crazy to me.
You just go straight up.
Yeah. It's crazy to me, like, just how close all that stuff is. It's like
within 20 minute
drive.
Yeah. Within 20 minutes, you can summit on the highway still at like, I think it's 9,900 feet or right around there. So it's just right up, like 15 miles up the canyon. You just climb straight up.
My other assumption of this area was that, west of us was just, flat Nevada, like kind of area. But actually, there's beautiful mountains on the other side, very green.
I know.
Very cool.
Yeah, I found a whole different wilderness area out there that I hadn't even seen on a map. It's just this tiny little one, and now I'm like, all right, I got to plan a trip to go hike through that now or something.
Explore this area.
Yeah.
So I don't know, how far away did you hike from the car? Not very far, right?
Yeah, so that was the biggest issue is timing. Like I had stuff to do. I couldn't leave the office till like 1 o'clock, so I couldn't start hiking until like 2. And then I hiked just under 2 miles in, but it was all uphill. It was I climbed about 500 feet in elevation getting up there. So had snowshoes in the snow, obviously. It was really fresh powder, so it wasn't packed or anything like that. It didn't have the crust, which is kind of nice. Like on a snowshoe, sometimes the crust, you have to step on it and then it breaks.
Like the hard layer of snow on top of the soft.
Yeah, so that was kind of nice to not have to deal with, but at the same time, it was soft snow. So maybe a little bit more effort in that mark. So yeah, I didn't have a ton of time and I was self-filming. So when you do that, you kind of got to go set up the camera, loop back around, walk by, loop back around, get the camera. And so it took me a couple hours to get in there. I was really hoping to be at camp by like 3 o'clock, and I didn't get there till 4, and it's dark at 5, and that was probably the biggest mistake, is just not getting out of the office early enough to set camp up early enough.
Right.
Or to just plan on the amount of time it took me to film, because I was even planning on going farther in, but when it came down to it, I'm like, I've got not enough time to go any farther. So
there's a good chance that the podcast listeners who are listening at home on their phones or whatever might not have seen the video. You want to just tell them what happened that night, basically?
Yeah, so I hike in, absolutely stunning, beautiful. The trees are just flocked with snow, and just had this amazing, peaceful hike in. I was feeling great about it. And then get up there and I can see all these wind swirls and I'm thinking, man, I need to find a place out of the wind. So I hike a little ways away and I'm like, this looks decent. It was just barely getting into the tree line. But really, I was just kind of checking my watch thinking, I gotta find a place for camp. So pick this spot just right on the edge of the trees. And the snow, I didn't bring a shovel. I ended up just thinking I could kind of dig it out. But the shelter I had is pretty good size. So it took me a little bit longer to kick the snow out of place and pack it down with the snowshoes and kind of get it to be ready for the shelter. And once that was all done, I then put the shelter up. And the shelter, this is the first time I'd slept in it. I'd set it up in my backyard, which I'm going to advise anyone and everyone to do at a bare minimum before you take it out. But I set up the shelter, and in the backyard, I couldn't get it to pitch just how I wanted. I was a little like, it's good, but it's not great type of a pitch. And I played with it for like 30 minutes in my backyard, on flat grass, and just couldn't get it to pitch right. And so I figured I'd be fine still, but right as I'm getting to this point, the wind just starts picking up really bad. I don't know how fast the gusts were or whatever, but they were really intense, and you can see it on the film.
You can see it in the footage. It's pretty rough.
the wind indicator of my beard was straight sideways at times, So, so I get this thing set up, and I get the stakes that I have down, and there's a couple extra tie points, but this thing is just blowing like crazy. And I didn't dig quite deep enough to get really good into the ground. So I was kind of redigging and reworking things to try to get solid stakes, because with that wind, it pulled the stake out at one point, and I wanted it to be really a tight pitch to handle that wind. But I didn't bring enough extra stakes. I did the cardinal sin of not pulling out stakes and checking how many and not realizing I could probably use a few extra. So then I ended up having to get some sticks and logs and I forget what it's called, a dead man's hold or something like that, where you kind of dig a hole, drop the branch in it, recover it, and tie that to the guy lines, which works really well, but it takes time and it's cold. When you have to pull your bare hands out to tie a little knot because they're not already tied on this brand new tent, that can zap the cold out of you. So I'm doing all this stuff, and then I get to this point where the tent is like almost acceptable level, almost, but it's still blowing around like crazy, and I'm like, this is just not looking good. But no. So before I did the extra tie-outs, I'd thrown all my gear in the tent on a pad, and I was poke my head in there, and I just see all my gear is covered in snow inside the tent, right? Just, it's a floorless shelter, and it's just covered in snow. And I'm just going, you gotta be kidding me. So that's when I go and tie it down a little bit better. And I get all that done, and it's like, all right, now it's almost dark. Like, I need to get firewood. So I just start running around and grabbing as much firewood as I can. And I'm breaking a branch off of one tree. And I was getting, one thing I feel like I still need to figure out is like how much firewood I need. Because every time I get way more firewood than I think I need, and then I cut it all up in the tent, and I've got all this nice firewood, and then I don't burn it all. And I'm like, dang, I wasted a lot of extra time, getting wood. But so at one point I'm breaking these dead branches off this tree, and I don't know what happened. I'm just kind of scrambling, trying to go really fast. The sun is setting at this point. The wind's still blowing. And I've just hiked in what I've hiked in, which is a dragon wool piece. And no, I was actually a polyester sun hoodie, just a super light little sun hoodie that works pretty good as a base layer. And then a Ventus. So that's all I had on. And for those of you that don't know, the Ventus is just a super lightly insulated hoodie. Mm-hmm. The wind's whipping through. I'm getting freaking cold. My hands are cold from having to set up the shelter. And I'm breaking off this branch, and it just snaps. And the piece in my hand was still in my hand, but another piece like rocketed off the tree and slapped me in the side. Mm-hmm. And it really rocked me. Like I about went to my knees, like gasping, you know what I mean? Like I was like, oh.
I'm still trying to, whenever you tell the story, I'm trying to figure out the physics of it.
I don't either. I don't know what it is either, right? Like I think back and I'm like, what did something, it's just so cold and those branches are so stiff and frozen that when it popped, I think it just launched something at me or something, which anyways, so that took me like 60 seconds of just kind of like dazed. And then I kind of was like, oh my heck, like I don't even have my other jacket on. What am I doing? Like I was scrambling and so cold. I just wasn't thinking properly in that scramble and with that extreme cold. And so I went over and I grabbed my Nova Pro, our bigger jacket that we make out of my bag, threw that on, and it was like, oh, that was like a big breath of fresh air. Because the thing about the Nova is the fabric cuts the wind so well. And so getting that on cut the wind and then also added just a ton more warmth. And so that definitely helped me kind of calm down a lot. But it reminded me a lot of on the Beaver fast pack we did, the Tusher Skyline Trail.
Yep, and there's 2 podcasts about that you guys can go listen to.
Yeah, at the end of the second day of that one, we got into camp. The temperature started dropping. It actually kind of started snowing, raining. And I went and walked over to this bathroom because where we'd camped, actually, we were crossing a road right there. And I got super cold. And I didn't realize it at first. And by the time I was walking back, I couldn't keep my teeth from chattering. I just realized like how much cognitive ability I'd lost. Like my brain wasn't thinking as clearly. Luckily, my tent was already set up. My bag was already set up. So I knew I just had to walk a couple hundred yards to my tent, climb in, and I could, be safe essentially. But it really reminded me of that. I'm like, man, I really am not and was not thinking very clearly. And so that's when it got more real for me. It was like, okay, this is getting pretty serious. If I can't, I need to get this stove built. And if I can't get this stove built and have like some heat sources here pretty soon, I may need to turn around and hike out of here. Mm-hmm. And it's too cold for me to take down the tent and to go all through all that. I will just have to leave what's already kind of set up and just hike out and get warm. When you're moving and stuff, obviously you generate a lot of body heat. And the layers I had would have been just fine to keep me plenty warm hiking. They just weren't cutting it when I'm sitting and trying to build a stove and all that stuff. And so I kind of set this limit in my head of like, all right, if I can't get this stove built and a fire going within 15 minutes, I need to call it. It's just not safe anymore at this point. So started building that stove. And I don't think this was even on the camera, but my fingers just would not work. And at that stove, I mean, it collapses to nothing. So you have to build it. It can be kind of hard to build. I hadn't built it in a year. And so I'm trying to like kind of remember with my foggy brain how to rebuild it. And it took me a minute, and my fingers, I just could not get the little like screws on the right places. So I had to go take my glove completely off, and I'm trying to pick up.
I didn't realize you would have to like screw things in.
Yeah, so you can have like little nuts going on like this all thread that goes all the way through the stove. And the amount of times I dropped this wing nut, like I just dropped it, and I'd like pick it up and I'd try and drop it.
Fingers all numb?
Yeah, they were just so numb that I was really struggling. And that's when I was like, holy, like, again, like, all right, I got not much time to get this done or this is going to become a problem. Anyway, so thankfully I built the stove. It wasn't probably the best, I don't know, I could say pitch of a stove. Like it was a little wobbly, and but got it, good and stable enough. Got it set up. And right about then, the wind started slowing down because the sun was going down. The sun's gone. Like it's still like light, but the sun is, you can't see it anymore. Dusk, I guess, would be the proper term or something like that. Anyways, so get the stove going, grab some pyro putty, and start it up. And took me a couple little tries, but got it going. Just because trying to get the right wood and get the pyro putty in the right spot with numb fingers. But it got it going, and that was like big breath of relief, big sigh of relief right there. So at that point, really, it all started calming down. Started coming down a ton. One, the wind kept slowing down more and more and more. I had a fire. I could warm my hands right there. I had enough wood to like keep it going. I had wood stacked outside. I needed to cut it still, but I could keep that fire going the rest of the night. I knew I could. So that started to feel a lot more relaxed and started to settle in. And from there, the rest was honestly great. Like sat in there, cut up firewood, got the tent nice and hot, blew up my pad, pulled out my sleeping bag. The tent was at that point, I'd been able to pitch it a little bit lower and everything was more secure. So I wasn't getting snow blowing in the sides or anything like that. And I had some stuff pushed up against the sides and spots too. And so really at that point, it was pretty cozy and got better and better and better. Other than the fact that like I didn't have a ton of firewood already cut. Like in an ideal world, shelter's all set up, wood's cut, everything's ready when night hits so that you can just sit in there, watch the fire,
There's no
drink
panic.
hot cocoa. There's no panic. But I still, I had the wood outside the tent, but I was kind of having to open up the tent, bring in a few branches, break them, cut them. And anytime I took my focus off of that for a little bit, the fire would start to get low. I'd start to get low. So that was the only thing that was still, just kind of had to keep some pressure on until I built up those stocks. And as I'm trying to get the bag out, let it get lofted up, and then I'd look back oh man, the fire's doing this. And
it's just what you pay. It's the price you pay for going in late.
Yep.
Basically.
One extra hour would have made the whole thing nice and peaceful. I feel like, other than still, I just didn't love the shelter, but,
So you had 4 hours of sleep. Did the stove go, did it burn out when you were asleep?
Yeah. So those shelters, they're very interesting. It's almost hard to explain, but in the real close proximity to that stove, it gets downright hot in there, or it can. But then I could turn around and look at the far end of my 11-foot long shelter, and the other end is still frozen on the inside. There's condensation frozen on my down by your feet. It's because they just don't retain the heat. They're hot and they retain it right in that proximity.
It's not an insulated tent.
No, you're talking about ultralight fabrics, right? They're not going to retain heat. So, I'm going to space what your question was originally, but so you're just really huddled in the one end.
So when you said you slept for in the video.
Oh yes. So you could stoke that fire up, and if you've got the right kind of wood, slow burning wood. There's been times when I've had cedar branches. It's a very dense wood. That thing will almost keep at least coals in it 6 hours. But the stuff I was burning was pine, and when I stoked it up to go to bed, put as much wood as I could in there, and then you just go to bed, and I would say it probably was done kicking off much heat within 2-3 hours. So I slept, I don't remember what time I went to bed. It was 10 o'clock. Maybe.
You had to get up, right? You had to get up at 7.
I was trying to get to bed early, but it was a little bit later than I still wanted. But I slept from 10 to 2 or 3 in the morning just straight, which was really impressive. I'm usually a tosser in turn. I'll roll over almost every hour, maybe 2 hours in the summer, or any time of year when I'm camping in a tent. And so to get that locked in sleep was really good. That might have been because of I had some it's called sleepy chai. It's a drink from Mountain Ops. I don't know if we still sell it or we still have it on the website, but it's got melatonin in it and stuff. So that might have been a contributor. I don't know. I was also exhausted. I hadn't slept the night before.
It's got to be the exhaustion.
Yeah,
right?
I hadn't slept the night before, but I woke up and I was all right, I'm going to restoke the fire. So I threw some stuff in there and hoping the coals would still be hot enough, and they weren't. So I didn't get it restoked in the night. I just went back to bed and then woke up at 5 something and got it going and kind of laid there and let it heat up, and then slowly.
That was something I didn't expect when I was going through the footage, was that you actually restarted the stove in the morning.
Yeah.
Why do that? Why not just pack up and go?
One, it's freaking cold outside that bag.
Yeah, I understand that.
I want to warm up my shoes.
So you were still in the bag and you were just
Yeah, so I just kind of pulled my arms out of the bag, rolled over and put wood back in there, grabbed another chunk of pyro putty and started it up. That's really just one, there's tons of condensation and frozen condensation in the tent, and just I'm gonna have to do chores and use my fingers and stuff. So rolling up my pad, stuff in my sleeping bag, all that kind of stuff. If I'm warm, it's just gonna be way more enjoyable. The nice thing is with titanium, because that's a titanium stove, which we'll have to touch on because we got a lot of comments, but the second that fire goes out in a titanium stove, especially in those temperatures, that titanium will cool off in seconds.
Really?
Seconds. Yeah.
That was something that's
Yeah, now you have to
going.
wait for it to cool off. No, as long as you can dump, get it to the point where you can dump the coals out of it and the wood out of it.
Right.
That thing will cool off in seconds.
Wow.
It's incredible. Wow. Because it's just really thin titanium. If you've got a titanium pot, you'll see that. You'll boil water, you'll dump it out, you'll set the pot down, and that thing will be cooled off in seconds. So that is one very nice aspect that you can kind of count on with those, is you can relight it in the morning and still just dump out the coals and be on your way pretty quick. So,
did you make it to your son's dealio?
I did. I was a couple minutes late. I I was running. I didn't film this, but I was running in the snowshoes down the mountain. Whenever it was permissible, because some of it was real steep and couldn't. But I got home at the time I thought, but I mismanaged and planned. So I was about 5 minutes late. I didn't miss anything from him, but we were trying to get there at like 9 o'clock, and I had to take a second car. I was there at like 9:05. Nothing happened, but
that's good.
I made it.
So about winter, so I didn't know hot tenting was a thing.
Yeah.
Until I saw one of your guys' older videos.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked you about winter camping. We kind of glanced over it. When did you find out hot tenting was a thing? When did you first try that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there was always like the big sheep herder wall tents, outfitter tents that had like big stoves. Yeah. But I don't know if I remember anyone besides those people doing it until a company called Seek Outside started to get popular. There might have been, I think there were some people like DIY and stuff. Maybe there was like a really small company that never, got bigger that was started to make little stoves, and people were making them at first out of just stainless steel and stuff like that. And then eventually titanium kind of became a thing. But, so for me, it was probably 5 years ago when I just started to see them, hear about them. And then, I don't know, I probably bought that stove 3 years ago, might be around there, and have used it a little bit since. I kind of hodgepodged it into one of our tents once, which I don't talk about a lot because I didn't feel like it was super safe. No. And I didn't really want to recommend that to people. It just wasn't designed for it. So then I eventually got this shelter and I've tried it out. And last year actually, when I went and took it, I tried to just do it with a tarp. So just one of our tarps and my stove. That was kind of an adventure. Probably not in a good way. No. Because one, it's so airy underneath the tarp, even pitching it kind of as low as you can, there's just still so much draft in there. And that thing, like, you need to be sealed in there for that heat to stay at all. So unless I was sitting right next to it, it really wasn't very warm. And then, like, there's the other considerations of, like, the tent holds the stove. So when I got there, I'm like, there's nothing to hold the stove. So I had to tie string around the very top of the stove where it'd be the coldest, tie it to trees so the stove would just stand up.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
So there were some things like that. So again, I kind of retrofitted stoves into our products for about 2 years. And then I was like, this is dumb. I'm done with this.
So then I
bought a tent designed for it. And then now I've bought a second tent at this point that's better designed.
More information on the gear loadout video that we just put out on the Outdoor Vitals YouTube channel. So about the stove, I guess tell us about the stove. It's a Seek Outside, and it's like 2 pounds, right?
Yeah, so they have a model called the U-turn, which just collapses really, really small. In the video I show it, it basically got like one square that's like an inch tall, and then just a tube that carries everything else. And the whole stove is right about 2 pounds. I wish I would have weighed just that piece of it. Maybe I did. But it's right about 2 pounds. I have the large size too, so that I could put more wood in there and bigger pieces of wood and not have to cut them so short and so small. They have even lighter ones than the one I have, but I think it was like you save about a half pound, and I just figured for the usefulness of having the larger stove. They actually talked me into it one time. I saw them at the show and was talking with them, but so yeah, that's the stove, and it's a phenomenal piece. It's an investment. It is an investment. Titanium's not cheap, and especially all the components that are titanium in there are not going to be cheap. And it's kind of funny though, like you pull that stove apart, and the heaviest part of the whole stove are these pieces of, it's called all thread, but it's like a bolt that's just threading the whole way top to bottom. Oh, wow. And that goes through the entire stove, and then it's also the legs coming out the bottom. So there's 4 pieces of that, one for each corner.
How long is that?
They're like 12 inches.
Okay.
Something like that. And those are the heaviest, like those weigh as much as the rest of everything else combined that's all titanium. Just those 4 pieces of just, I was like, man, if someone made some all thread that was titanium, that thing would be shave another half pound off of the weight. But yeah, they're really incredible stoves. They are an investment. I have not used one, but there's another company called Lux Hiking that has a stove that I think is a little bit more affordable. But I really like the Seek Outside stuff. It's very well proven, very well tested, very highly rated, but it's probably going to be a little bit more money, and it will be for sure lighter weight. But.
Yeah. I couldn't believe that stove was only going to be like 2 pounds. Like, he's going ultralight. He says he's going ultralight. It's only 18. And like, that's when you did the gear load, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
That really was.
It's hard to fathom.
Pretty
that,
light.
Right? Like my winter setup. So especially the one that I upgraded to. So I bought the tent I'll be using next is the Seek Outside Silex, which is a pretty good size for one person and the stove. But it's just super light. They've done some really cool designs on it. And that thing, I want to say, is like 22 ounces. Then you've got my stove at 2 pounds. And then let's say you've got a footprint that you got to throw in there and stakes. So that whole shelter with stove, everything is still like 4 pounds or less. Yeah. Which half of people's tents are 4 pounds.
I got a one-man tent that's 3.5 pounds.
Yeah. And no stove.
No stove.
And then the nice part is, too, when you've got a stove, I don't need to bring my alcohol stove or a gas canister in a pocket rocket or something like that, or the one I use is the Crux Light. So I don't need to bring that. So that's 8 ounces, let's say, 8 to 12 ounces, depending on if you've got a full can or not, that I don't have to bring. Right. So you can almost take that right back off to where it's like, dang, this is closer to a 3 pound setup now. It's just it's pretty phenomenal. Yeah.
So would you ever? So this. Another question here. Of course, hot tenting, new to me. Might be new to a few other people. Doesn't seem like it's that, I don't know, that big of a thing right now.
Popular.
It's probably gaining popularity thanks to YouTube and stuff like that. We're not the only hot tent video out there.
Right.
Would you winter camp? Like, what would you do differently if you didn't have a stove?
Yeah, because I've definitely done that a lot. First off, the first thing you're going to want to do is get on Audible or get on Netflix and download some stuff to watch. Because as soon as that sun goes down, you're going to want to get in your sleeping bag. So just know that up front, because that's the biggest difference. With the stove, I can hang out in my tent in my pajamas, and my little down booties on, and I just can chill in there and sip my hot cocoa, and it's pretty relaxing. When you don't have that option, you're at least going to put your lower half in your sleeping bag right away. The cocoon. Yep, and you might have to get all the way in. So things to note are definitely things like condensation, especially if you're trying to watch your phone, and a lot of times you kind of end up getting down in your bag, and so be aware of breathing too much condensation into your bag and some things like that. But as far as differently, the stove is a fantastic catch-all for if you get something wet. If your boots get moist or wet during the day,
dry them out.
You can dry them out next to that stove at night, and the next day you've got a set of dry boots. Now, if you've got, if you don't have that option, that starts to compound. So the one time that the first time I ever got frostbite in my feet was because of exactly that. I was 7 days in kind of the middle of November in the Colorado Rockies in the snow, and my boots just got more wet every day. I was rotating socks. Sometimes my socks wouldn't dry out very well because it just wasn't warm enough, or there wasn't enough sunlight. And so that would compound day after day after day. And it was in the bag I'd be warm, but the whole day long my feet were just incredibly cold. And so towards the end of that trip, I finally got in the bag one night and was my toes are not gaining their feeling back.
I can't feel my toes.
There's an issue going on, and sure enough, it took almost 2 months to get feeling back in some of those toes. So just beware of there's things like that. The stove is this big forgiving part of it, but it's not required. And there was things going back to that Colorado trip I could have done way different. I didn't have the best set of boots. They could have been more waterproof, and they could have been more insulated. You can't I think you can't just rely on switching your socks, dry a boot out or something in the snow. It just doesn't work very well, or well enough, I should say. So other things, I I do switch to a gas canister stove instead of an alcohol stove, primarily, which this is not a recommendation. This goes against our terms on our tents and things. You should not have a fire inside your tent. Just saying, but I do. I'll kind of trench something out, dig it, make it really safe and stable, and then I can like cook inside the vestibule, at least heat up water, some stuff like that, which is one other adaptation I do, especially if I don't have the full-on stove system.
So I have a question about this stove, this hot tenting situation. All these hot tents, they're floorless. Yes. Do they have to be? So the air comes in basically and keeps everything oxygenated? Yeah, you can buy like nests for them, basically inners. And I think if you bought the right setup, you could have an inner and have the stove outside of it. But the stove needs to be on the ground. You don't want it on top of a footprint, really. Because then it's got to go out of the mesh as well. So, yeah, for the most part, they are all floorless. But you might be able to get one or two of them to kind of work with like a nest that's in half of like a bigger shelter, like a teepee. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, they're all floorless. Yeah, that's one thing that's definitely making me hesitant about it. It's just like that, like, at least on the tent that you set up in the video.
It did not pitch low enough.
Yeah, it didn't pitch low enough. There was quite a bit of a gap there. And just thinking about, like, how cold it was that night, -9 degrees, that's really cold. On top of the fact that there might be wind or whatever. Obviously, there was wind at a certain point because your stuff got snowed in. Like,
if that snow would pack better, you can go around the outside and just throw some snow around the whole outside, and it would just pack down and seal.
Yeah, I saw a YouTube comment being like, why don't you just do this?
Yeah, there's that option. But that snow was so fine. It was so fresh. It wasn't really working that well for that.
Is that Utah powder? The dry snow?
Dry. It's like sand, man. Yeah. It's weird. The other option would be to have a tent with snow skirts. But really, I just could not pitch it low enough because my trekking pole, I would even put it on an angle, especially in the foot end, and it was too tall to get the foot down. So there's just it was just that I didn't love that. Maybe if I had a type of trekking pole that had 4 sections in it, I could have got it low enough to the ground to like seal a little bit better in that scenario, but that was kind of the biggest issue. People sometimes see that and think like, oh, I'm just not wrapped inside of it. It's really not that big of a deal. There's no bugs. There's no snakes out. You know what I mean? So like that fear goes completely away. It's really just trying to get it pitched low enough to the ground or having snow skirts or pushing snow against it if the snow's works for you.
Okay. So what else did you learn any huge, big overarching lessons from this thing, or just little things like maybe try the tent a little bit more and return the tent, get a different tent? Is that your biggest lesson from this?
That's probably the biggest one. Is just, I think you just got to know your gear. You got to know really what you're dealing with, and if you've got anything that's new, like make sure you're really familiar with it. I did set it up in the backyard, but it probably would have been better for me to have tied guy lines to it earlier on. Make sure I had a couple extra stakes, maybe a snow stake or two. But if I could have used that same shelter in a less severe condition, it would have been better for me just to
maybe
be more familiar.
Fall backpacking with the hot tent.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a really good tip. As far as other tips, I mean, I didn't do this in the video, and someone made a comment, and that would have been smart of me to do, and I should have known this. Like, I've done it this way before, but I could have used the snow shoes as kind of shovels. That might have saved me a little bit of time digging out the snow area.
As opposed to kicking it?
As opposed to kicking it and stomping it, and stuff. Could have done that.
Just blame that on the cold.
You didn't. I wasn't thinking.
You weren't thinking.
I didn't. I kind of like got started and realized it was a bigger project than I thought it was going to be. So it's kind of like all right, just needs a little more. And then it ended up being, I don't know how much.
How big was the tent? You said it was 11 feet across?
It's like 11 feet long. So they're really long. Plus you got to kick out spots for the stakes to go longer than that.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Okay, yeah. So
it's just really long. Width-wise, it wasn't too wide, but that shelter's pretty big. That was kind of the original reason I got that particular one over some others was I was hopeful I could get 2 people in it. And that was a pipe dream. That's not happening. So
are there ultralight hot tents made for more than one person?
Yes.
Out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Most of them, the most popular ones are TP style, and you can get them from, 2 people type TP sizes up to I think Seek Outside will custom make one that is like 16 people size. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So lots of options in that, but I would say most people are using like 4-man TP sized ones, and you got to typically count that the stove's going to take up at least a 1 person out of that. So if you got a 4 person TP, you're probably going to get 3 people in it realistically.
I foresee questions about Outdoor Vitals possibly getting into the hot tenting game.
Yeah. No.
No.
No, not
yet.
Well, that's kind of what you alluded to it earlier. People like to watch it. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But I don't immediately see all of our people going out and getting real serious and investing in the titanium products and the shelters, because you're going to have to put some investment into it. Not a lot. I will say you can use 3-season gear into the 4th season really well with just a few tips and tricks. We've done videos and podcasts on that in the past. We'll do them again. So don't think that you got to totally re-kit for the winter by any means, but there's still going to be some things, especially if you wanted to do it this way. But really, it's just a game of percentages. The percent of people of our audience that are going to do it, buy it, use it aren't high enough. Mm-hmm. Seek Outside, they've done well with some hikers, extreme level hikers. But for the most part, their audience is hunters. Hunters are going to go out rain or shine during their season dates. And a lot of the time, the hunting is better in the colder months and getting into November and times like that. And so they've just killed it with hunters.
Yeah, and hunters, I've heard this being discussed around the office. I'm not a hunter. About half of us aren't. But here around the office, hunters will just buy the really expensive, really heavy duty kind of stuff. It's a totally different audience as opposed to ultralight backpackers, right?
Well, yes and no.
Yes and no?
About 10 years ago, there was a guy by the name of Jason Harrison that came in and said, I'm like a backpack hunter, right? Why do I have to go to REI to buy all my backpack hunting stuff? It's not made for hunters. I'm buying Arc'teryx stuff or whatever it is, and then I'm taking it hunting. It's not camouflage, and it's not built for hunters for some of the things that we need different. And so he jumped in and started a company called Kuyu Ultralight Hunting. And honestly, I attribute most of what's happened in the hunting industry in the last 10 years to him kicking off this movement. And so he started this company, and the tagline for the company is Ultralight Hunting. And so he went in and just started building a bunch of ultralight stuff for hunters. So now there is a massive wave of lightweight backpack hunters, ultralight backpack hunters. Most of them, though, I will still say are far from the weights that I can get to, even hunting. But they're all conscious of it now. There's a lot more consciousness around it. People are buying more expensive, more light gear for those reasons. But, especially before 10 years ago, weight was not a consideration. People didn't know gear very well at all. I froze to death growing up and hunting with my family, so many times, and had so many miserable experiences. But it's a fair assumption, but it is changing for sure.
Good. Okay. All right. Is there anything else you wanna add about your trip before I talk about our sponsor? What did you eat?
Oh, hot meals are always nice in the winter, right? So I had a Peak refuel, and I always will have a Peak refuel with me. There's just nothing else I'll eat at this point. I can't do Mountain House anymore. Just doesn't sit with me well, and it's like a gourmet stinking meal on the trail that actually has good nutrients. So I always will have a Peak refuel. And then I had that chai. That was really nice. Peak refuel also has come out with these little dessert packets. So I had the brownie. They're called brownie bites and cookie bites. I didn't tell you this, but I think the cookie bites are better. But I had brownies, and I was putting peanut butter on the brownie bites. And man, I ate a lot of food. I burned a lot of calories. That's something good to know. In the winter, you're going to burn more calories. Also, make sure if you think you're going 5 miles, you might go 2.5 because it's just a lot harder to cover miles in the winter. So be aware of that. But I just sat in there and ate and then warmed up a hot drink.
And I got to say that food looked good. It's like it's funny, like halfway through the video, you're having this like, you're with you. We're with you as the audience, and we're cold, but then you start eating like, oh man, I'm hungry.
That was like the turning point of like, this is relaxing and hungry, and the fire looks nice. And
it's all nice.
It was.
Yeah, the whole trip is nice.
It got great.
Forget about the rest of it.
Yeah. Type 3 fun, went to type 2 pretty quick.
There you go.
By the end, it was just good.
So this episode is brought to you by your new backpacking food fund through the Live Ultralight membership. $10 a month gets you $10 a month in store credit that never expires, year-round discounts, free upgraded shipping, rebates, early access, and limited edition gear. Those discounts include retail items like backpacking food. And everybody here eats Peak Refuel pretty much,
Peak
right?
Peak Refuel tells us we are one of their best stores there are.
Nice.
And I think that we, as an office, consume a lot of what we buy from them. But we do sell a lot of it. Yeah. I do want to put some pressure on the team this next year to expand our food lines. So there's a few brands on the horizon that we need to get in contact with and get set up with as a retailer. But the food aspect of the membership is probably the best. You know, like even if you're not sure you'll ever buy another product from us, it is the cheapest way to get food.
The cheapest way.
Yeah.
That we know.
Because it's gated, meaning it's not a public price on the food. We can list it below what's called MSRP, or like the public price, essentially, that the companies will require us to sell it at. So you can't buy Peak Refuel unless it's like on a flash sale or something, maybe. You can't buy Peak Refuel cheaper than us all year long.
So it's the perfect backpacking food fund. The discounts on our great gear. Certainly, this is since joining this company, I have backpacking gear. Now I'm spoiled. I can't go back to like what I bought at Sportsman's Warehouse or Walmart before. Like,
it is true.
It's over.
Yeah,
it's over. You can literally not get a better price anywhere. And if you want to know more, links to the membership and a big list of our amazing gear, all of that will be found in the description of this episode. If there's nothing else you want to add, Tayson, you can interrupt me at any time, since you are, of course, my boss.
No, Derek's your boss. I'm just a nobody. I'm just a nobody.
You're the big boss. Anyway, feel free, guys, if you're listening to this, send us your comments, your questions about backpacking. If you have any really cool outdoor stories, we especially like it if you want to plug some Outdoor Vitals gear. That's really nice.
I really enjoyed that podcast with the lady who did the through hike.
Yeah, Tracy.
Yeah, so if you've got a cool story to tell, maybe let us know.
Yeah, or ideas for future topics. If we think it'll bring value to our audience, we will read it on the show. And you can send them by commenting on our brand new Live Ultralight Podcast YouTube channel. That's one way to do it. Or you can send us an email at LiveUltralightPodcast@gmail.com. That's LiveUltralightPodcast@gmail.com. So on last week's episode, we had a nice little comment here from Zach Cherry.
Yeah, I haven't even read this one yet. So
so this is a question for you, because this is about, like, last week we had a podcast on kind of Outdoor Vital, State of the Union, what happened in 2021, what you're looking forward to in 2022, and of course the outdoor industry. You guys talked about that for about 20 minutes on the tail end of the episode. So Zach Jerry asks, guys, very good updates. I'm a new customer to you this year with 2 products I'm loving so far. As a continuous improvement manager where I work, it's awesome to hear the changes you've been experiencing. It's truly a fulfilling journey. I'm also in manufacturing, so definitely feeling the pain of supply chain and inflation.
Oh, yeah.
Is there any type of regional supply you've been able to find to mitigate those supply issues? I feel like the U.S. is going to have to totally rethink its strategy on supply chain because of this. Here's to a great 2022. Thanks. Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, I remember way back, it might have been in high school or earlier, I've always been a Toyota fan, and just kind of learning about Kaizen and getting into some of that, that's always stuck with me. So I I definitely hear you on just that continuous improvement manager. I'm sure I probably understand at least some of what you do and really like those principles. But as far as, is there any type of regional supply you've been able to find? I'll just be honest. This is going to get a little into some gray area for some people that might be listening, because some people are very much pro U.S. manufacturing. The problem is we have lost all the sewers in the USA, meaning all the sewing, really, the cut and sew shops and stuff really moved out of the USA, got off, sent overseas and so on and so forth. And then we lost a generation of sewers. And so even if we wanted to at this point, you just can't find enough people to cut and sew, and they don't have any experience, and you can't teach them. So there are a few cut and sew shops within the United States, and they are booked to max capacity, and they have all sorts of struggles, and it's a different set of things. So that would not actually help us supply chain at all to look into some of those options. But I also want to say this: I went and lived overseas for a couple years when I was young, 19, 20, 21. And I came, really part of the reason I started Outdoor Vitals is I came back from that and just thought, I want to help those people so much. They have nothing. They wouldn't know what to do with a good job if they had one, working 5 days a week to them, they would not even know what to do, right? And to be able to have stability and stuff like that. And so I really came back thinking man, how can I work with Asia, create jobs for those people, change lives over there? And so that was part of what got me into looking at all of this and eventually into starting Outdoor Vitals. And so we did start in China with a lot of our cut and sew. And after going and visiting China, walking factories, it became really apparent that they're no longer expanding any cut and sew. In fact, all of the cut and sew factories in China are shrinking. And for good reason. Now they've gone through their industrial revolution. All of their kids were able to go to school, get an education. And with an education, they don't want to go do sewing, right? So then, because they have an education, now all these young people are working in the airports and in the hotels and in these higher skilled education professions, and so it's only old people essentially working in the factories, and they're trickling out. So all of these Chinese factories are just shrinking, and then everyone is moving cut and sew into the next third world countries where people's lives will be changed by these jobs, and so. Now most of our manufacturing is moving into Vietnam. So, you go and visit Vietnam, and it's quite a poor country, and we're putting millions of dollars a year into these countries that are supplying thousands of jobs, and it will change them because now their parents have a stable job. Kids can go to school. And then when kids can go to school, it'll change them, and soon we'll have to move out of Vietnam. So I've talked with our manufacturer a lot about they've gone in and started a factory in Ethiopia. I'm fascinated by it because the amount of money that companies like us could push into Ethiopia and the amount of change that would create for them in education and hygiene and all of that is just phenomenal. So I'm always asking them, when is that factory going to be at the level that we're willing to produce there? Meaning sometimes it can take a while for a factory to hit certain quality levels. Mm-hmm. And for a company like us, we have very high quality thresholds. And so don't be surprised if in maybe a year or two, you see some of our products coming out of Ethiopia, of all places. And I'll feel great about it because I know that the hundreds of thousands that might go through that factory just from us are changing those people's lives. So that's my political reason. I know that got way political, but in short, no, there's really nothing we can do regionally to benefit this. We just have to plan better, and we've made a lot of improvements. Got a lot of products that'll be launching this next year, and a lot of what you'd call purchase orders in for us that are way far in advance to mitigate this. But yeah, that's about what we can do.
Yeah, I've definitely seen some flack on some comments on Dan Becker's channel. Whenever he says something nice about us, they're like, "Well, they don't make stuff in the USA."
It's crazy, right?
Well, most of the stuff you have isn't made in the USA.
Yeah, seriously. If you only wear that stuff, you don't have a lot of options.
No. But there's a really good podcast episode. I'm spacing out on the name. I really can't remember it, but you did go into depth basically on this topic pretty early on the Live Ultralight podcast. So guys, go check out the back catalog. You'll find it there, and kind of go more in depth about how like this sort of globalization, I guess it helps everyone. Yeah.
Last thing I wanted to touch on that we touched in that State of the Union podcast is that we just found out yesterday another company sold to a venture capital fund.
Another backpacking.
So there's a company called Stone Glacier. They're a hunting brand, but an ultralight backpacking hunting brand. And apparently they just sold out to an investment company. So another one bites the dust.
Anybody been knocking on your doors lately?
I don't hear them out if they have. They go straight to spam, man.
Oh, okay. And I'll let you guys know, if you give us positive iTunes reviews, they will be read on the show also. Guys, please subscribe to this on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. We really appreciate it. Again, give us comments. LiveUltralightPodcast at gmail.com. And if you want some really great ultralight backpacking gear, really high quality stuff that we actually use here when we are on our trips, that we're continuing to test and improve on and everything like that when we go on our monthly excursions, or if Tayson goes and freezes his butt off up in Bryan Head, Utah. Please check the links down below. If you want to know more about this trip, the whole gear list, there will be a link down in the description or at a card at the end of this episode, as well as the actual trip video itself, which is a lot of fun to watch. So go check those out on the Outdoor Vitals YouTube channel. And with that, guys, we'll see you later.
Yeah, appreciate it, Joe. Thanks for joining us.